Hello everyone, welcome to History class. Today we are going to continue Lesson 7 of History, British Policies and Their Impact. Earlier we had discussed about Indian economy before the advent of the British revenue system and economy after the advent of the British. And today the topic of the day is effects of the British commercial policy. The objectives of today's topic are you will come to know about decline of traditional industry and exploitation of artisans and weavers. But before starting today's topic, let us recall the definitions and cross questions related to the previous topics. Definitions: tenant, ijardari system, permanent settlement, rayatwari system, absentee landlord, and mahalwari system. Now answer these cross questions. What was a significant means of livelihood in villages? Which Mughal emperor allowed the British to collect revenue from Odisha, Bihar, and Bengal? How many new revenue collection systems were introduced by the company? What was the other name of permanent settlement? What is the meaning of word mahal? Tell any two effects of the revenue collection systems. And what do you mean by drain of wealth? Now let us discuss new words related to today's topic. Industrial Revolution, transition or change to new manufacturing processes from about 1760 to about 1820 and 1840. Raw material, the basic material required to make finished or final products. Handicrafts, handmade decorative items. Handicraft industry, the industry in which decorative items or things are made by hand or using simple tools. Exploitation, the act of treating someone unfairly in order to get benefit from their work. Dynasties, series of rulers belonging to same family. Now the topic is effects of the British commercial policy. Effects means influences. And the British commercial policy was the British government's policy governing international trade. Before the advent of the British, India was storehouse of handicrafts, cotton, silk products, etc. The muslin industry, that was a cotton fiber industry of Dhaka, was very famous and was leading in the spheres of textile. The Indian trade had got much patronage from the rulers, such as the Mughal rulers gave special importance to art and craft. But with the advent of the British in India, India was reduced to the status of economic colony. It was treated as market for raw materials, which resulted in impoverishment of traditional industry of India. Now, let us read from the book. After the decline of the Mughals, local rulers continued to support art, crafts, and industries. But the advent of the British colonial rule in India resonated with the death of Indian crafts and industries. Means after the downfall of the Mughals in India, the regional or the local kings supported Indian art, crafts, and industries. But with the arrival of the British colonial rule in India, the entire Indian art, crafts, and industries were ruined. Decline of traditional industry. The traditional industries of India included handloom, handicrafts, tiles, bricks, etc., and other household industrial activities were carried out in the rural parts of the country. The traditional industries were labor intensive and rely on skills passed on from one generation to another. In 19th century, the industrial revolution took place in Britain, Europe. With it, the traditional industry of India declined rapidly. In the 19th century, the industrial revolution took place in Britain. Industrial revolution was a time when the manufacturing of goods moved from small shops and homes to large factories. This shift brought about changes in culture too, as people moved from rural areas to big cities in order to work. It completely transformed the Indo British economic relations. Machine made cheaper goods of Britain gave a tough competition to the high priced handmade Indian goods. This resulted in an unequal competition between the two. Means the Industrial Revolution entirely changed the economic relations between India and Britain, as there was a tough competition between the machine made goods of Britain and handmade goods of India. The machine made goods were sold at low price in India, whereas the Indian handmade goods were expensive. So, it led to unequal competition between the both. The conquest of Bengal made the situation worse. Conquest means control of place by military force. Actually, the English East India Company was merely a trading company in early 17th century. In 1717, the company got the right to import and export the Britain made goods without paying any custom duty or taxes from the Mughal Emperor Farrukh Shah. However, the company's employees misused this right and carried illegal private trade for which they did not pay trade taxes or duties. This resulted in an enormous loss of revenue for Bengal. So the condition of Bengal worsened. The British goods coming to India were not charged any duty, while high duties were levied on Indian goods sent to England. Means no tax was put on to the British goods which were coming to India, but on the other hand, high taxes were levied on Indian goods which were sent to England. Instead of exporting finished goods, India was now forced to export raw materials like indigo, raw cotton, and silk. On the other hand, India was also forced to import cheap machine made goods from England. In this way, India became consumer of finished goods and supplier of raw materials. Its handicraft industry thus suffered a major setback. Means Indians were forced to grow and export cash crops like indigo, cotton, silk, etc., and import machine made goods from India at low prices. So, India became buyer of finished products and seller of raw materials. Thus, it resulted in the rapid decline of Indian handicraft industry. The ruin of Indian handicrafts led to the desertion of many towns which previously specialized in certain crafts. Desertion means abandonment. Prosperous cities like Murshidabad and the most of Deccan were depopulated and deurbanized. Prosperous means flourishing and Deccan means south. In the beginning of 18th century, Indian handicraft products were in great demand in the world market, and many of the Indian cities and towns were expert in making handicrafts. But the Industrial Revolution closed the markets for Indian handicrafts, and due to the decline in the Indian handicraft industry, many persons became jobless and they started leaving their towns and cities. So many of the flourishing cities like Murshidabad of West Bengal and many other southern cities of India became deserted and people started moving from the urban cities to their rural areas. Now let us read and discuss about exploitation of artisans and weavers. Exploitation means misuse or act of treating someone unfairly in order to get benefit from their work. And artisans were the persons who were skilled or expert in making things by hands. And weavers were the persons who weave the clothes. Till the middle of the 18th century, Indian handicraft products were in great demand in the world market, but the Industrial Revolution closed the markets for Indian handicrafts. Means the handmade products of Indian artisans and weavers were in great demand in the whole world, especially in Europe during 18th century. However, in the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution took place in Britain, and after that, the British closed all the markets of handmade products in India. Indian markets became flooded with cheap machine made products. So, we can say that the Indian handicrafts that had made the country famous till the middle of 18th century collapsed under the colonial rule with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and this was mainly due to the competition posed by the machine made goods that were imported from Britain. The ability of mass production of goods helped Britain to flood the Indian markets with cheap products, especially with the cotton textiles. After the Battle of Plassey, the British began exploiting the craftsmen of Bengal. The artisans were forced to sell their products below the market price. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the English East India Company transformed into a political power, and the company became the real master of Bengal. And it started utilizing the revenues of Bengal to finance its export of Indian goods. So the company used its political power, and the Indian artisans and weavers were forced to sell their products at cheaper and lower prices, even at a loss. To add to their woes, they were forced to buy raw material like cotton at very high prices from the company officials who purchased it at a nominal price from the cultivators. Nominal price means below the real price. Moreover, the company officials started purchasing the raw material from the farmers directly at very low prices, and on the other hand, they forced the Indian weavers and artisans to purchase the raw material from the company at the high prices. And even the prices of the goods produced by the weavers and craftsmen were fixed by the British. These prices were so low that the weavers and craftsmen could not survive and were forced to leave their craft. The worst affected the weavers of Bengal. The textile industry of Bengal virtually closed down, and thousands of weavers became jobless due to the closure of the weaving industry. The establishment and expansion of the British rule saw the decline of ruling dynasties like the Mughals. Dynasties means series of rulers belonging to the same family. Their decline deprived the artisans and weavers of the royal patronage. Patronage means support. Indian handicrafts thus suffered a severe blow due to the deprivation. Means before the arrival and establishment of the British rule in India, the Indian trade had got patronage from the rulers, such as the Mughal rulers gave the special importance to art and craft, and after the decline of Mughal rulers, the artisans and weavers suffered a lot because the English East India Company and the British were not in favor of the Indian handicrafts and they did not support it. The newly educated middle class Indians showed a keen preference for British manufactured goods. They brought goods that were made in England. This led to the ruin of Indian industries. In the early stages, the newly educated Indians were more westernized and they blindly accepted the British standards and fashions and looked down upon everything that was Indian. As a result, they started purchasing the goods that were made in England, and the demand for the products of Indian industries declined, which resulted in the devastation of the Indian industries. Most of the artisans and weavers were forced into agriculture. Even the peasants, who had adopted different crafts to supplement their agricultural income, were left in extreme poverty as they found it very difficult to continue with those crafts. As the Indian weavers and artisans depended entirely on the handicrafts industry, but with the decline of the handicraft industry, they became jobless and they were forced into agriculture. Moreover, the Indian farmers were also involved in the handicraft industries other than farming for earning their livelihood, and they found it difficult to continue with those crafts as there was a rapid decline in the handicraft industries. Overcrowding in agriculture made the peasants and artisans either agricultural laborers or jobless. So we can say that after the decline of handicraft industries, the farmers, weavers, and artisans suffered a lot. They became either jobless or agricultural laborers. And finally, the people were left in a state of continuous degradation. Major handicraft industries and the cottage industries like the textiles, leather, oil, and pottery were totally ruined. The self sufficient village economy gave way to the colonial economy, and India became an agricultural colony which only produced and supplied raw materials for the British. The Indian capitalists who ventured into manufacturing received no government support. Capitalists were the persons who invested their wealth in trade and industry for profit. So, after the decline of handicrafts industry, the Indian capitalists who had invested their wealth in manufacturing of handicrafts did not receive any help from the government. The policies that were framed were such that they favored the British and obstructed the growth of Indian industries. The country therefore saw no industrial development and remained economically backward. So we can conclude that the British domination of India brought about many changes in economic setup of India. And the British made all the policies which were in their own favor and they totally neglected the Indians. The British policy of making India a supplier of raw materials for its own industries and a dumping ground for its finished products had a negative impact on the Indian economic growth. The growth of Indian industries was halted by the British by adopting a policy of importing objects of daily use like pins, soaps, biscuits, needles, thread, etc. from England. This was the reason that there was no industrial development in India and India remained economically backward. Now, I hope lesson is clear to you. Your today's homework is to learn the lesson and solve the back exercises.